So, of course, the United States Army has requirements in order to join the United States Army. So today I want to talk to you about what are those requirements in 2024. So if you are someone that is interested in joining the Army in 2024, hell, probably even 2025, because most likely these standards will stay the same. These standards were the same for 2023, for 2022, will probably be the same for 2025, 2026, possibly, but things can change. So let's talk about some of those requirements to be able to join the United States Army in 2024. Now, this information, of course, comes from the United States Army. I also have it conveniently located over on my website at christopherchaos.com. I have a link down in the description box down below, and you can click on a little link to get you over to some other common things that people want to know about. But today we want to talk about what it takes to get into the United States Army. What are those basic requirements? So let's talk about those. So, of course, you have to meet the required age, all right? So first, we're going to talk about enlisted soldiers. If you want to go into the Army, be a private, specialist, eventually be a sergeant, whatever the case is, what does it take to get into the Army? So you have the age limit between 17 and 35. So let's talk a little bit about that before we move on to the next requirement. So 17 is the youngest. That does require you to have a parent sign off on you to be able to get examined at MEPS and everything else like that. You can ship off at the age of 17, but they want you to be able to turn 18 by the time you graduate all your initial training. So if you just turned 17 and it's going to obviously take you a year to turn 18, you may have some struggles to be able to kind of join that early, because they want you to turn 18 when you go off, because you got to be an adult when you go off to your first unit. If you are still going to be 17 by the time you would finish all of your initial training and head off to your first unit, then that kind of creates a problem. So you can join as early as 17, but it is going to require some parents to be able to sign off on you to be able to join, so that way you can do all the physicals and everything else you have to go through. If you're 18 years old, then obviously you don't need any parent consent because you're an adult. Then let's talk about that max age, 35. Now, there is a federal law that says that 42, I believe, is the max age that you can kind of join in the military, but each branch of service is able to set their own maximum standard. The Army has set 35. I've seen it thrown around a little bit where people talk about 39 being the max age, but right now, if you look at the official U.S. Army website for all the requirements, they currently still say 35. If they have changed it to 39, then the U.S. Army hasn't even updated itself. But nonetheless, don't get too wrapped around that, because even if you are in this situation, let's say you're 36, you're 37, whatever the case might be, there is still the possibility of getting an age waiver. One of the main things the Army usually looks at is they want to see, are you at the age that if you did 20 years, you'd be able to do 20 years and not be past the age of 55. Somewhere around there is usually what they're kind of looking at. So sometimes they can still make some exceptions based on your age. If you are prior service, it works differently as well, because they kind of subtract the amount of years you did in the military from that max age. But if you don't have any prior service, you've never served in the military, nothing like that, then yeah, they're going to have to go off of, what your max age is. And if you're over that max age, then you have to kind of look at trying to get a waiver. I have heard of people getting accepted for waivers. Waivers can be very tricky, so there's no telling if you're going to get it or get denied. But I've also heard from a lot of people that got denied waivers. So case by case basis, there are certain circumstances where even if you're over that max age limit, you can sometimes still join. You just have to talk to a recruiter. You have to try to work through the waiver process and try to see if you can get accepted. Now, the next thing is talking about is medical, moral, physical. So medically and physically fit and in good moral standing. So when you are trying to get into the United States Army, even into the military, you have to go through MEPS, right? The little central processing station, right, for military kind of exams. And there's a lot of things you have to go through, drug tests and everything, but there's also a physical in there. There's going to be a doctor that's going to look at, I think even nowadays, they look at some of your past medical history from your medical records that are, that they have to retrieve from your doctors or whatever from your file. But they are also going to do their own exam too. They're going to have to do some things. You're probably going to strip down to your underwear and kind of walk around like a duck. And they're going to make their own decision if you are physically fit, physically capable of being able to survive basic training, survive in the military, be able to do, the physical fitness test and everything. So you got to make sure that you can do these things. The next factor that comes into here is citizenship. Now, you don't have to be a U.S. citizen in every case. There are some cases where you will have to be a U.S. citizen, but at a minimum, for a lot of MOSs, or certain MOSs at least anyways, you have to at least be a U.S. resident. For whatever reason, I've gotten a lot of questions before where people are asking me, hey, I want to join the United States Army, but I still live in another country. Well, the Army is not going to move you to the United States. You have to already be a U.S. resident. That's why you have to have a green card, you have to be living in the U.S. to at least meet that requirement, and then all the other requirements as well. for joining the United States Army before you're going to be able to join. If you currently live in another country, you're going to have to move to the United States to be able to get that eligibility kind of knocked out of the way. So you have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident with a valid green card. You're going to have that green card. You have to be a valid resident, and you have to have a U.S. address that you live at currently, type of thing, to be able to be qualified. Now, additionally, if you are trying to get an MOS that requires a security clearance, if you need a secret clearance, you're going to need to be a U.S. citizen. So that is going to limit your abilities to be able to get certain MOSs if you are not a U.S. resident or a U.S. citizen. Sorry, you're not a U.S. citizen, then you won't be able to get certain MOSs that require a security clearance, because in order for you to get a secret clearance, you got to be a U.S. citizen. There is an education requirement of at least having a high school diploma or the equivalent. There was a time period where they were talking about waiving high school diplomas and allowing people to join without that. They quickly changed their mind on that and were like, nope, never mind. So you have to have a high school diploma. You have to have graduated high school or have the equivalent of that. Now, can you still join if you did not graduate high school? Yes, technically, sort of. There is an option that they do have where they do allow a very, very small percentage of people to be able to join the United States Army, and they haven't, passed high school. They haven't gotten a high school diploma. But if they've scored well enough in the ASVAB, then yes, they can. But that's a really small percentage. I would not bank on it. If you're in that situation, you can try, because I would not, discourage you from trying to try, to accomplish something like that if that's what you're going for. But just know that they only grant a very, very tiny, small percentage of people to be able to join the Army without having a high school diploma. Then there's also the test scores, right? You have the ASVAB and the PCAT. Most commonly, you're going to take the PCAT. The PCAT is the most common one you have to take. So you have to have a minimum score. So you have the AFQT portion of the ASVAB, which determines if you're going to be qualified to be able to join the United States Army or any other branch of service. And then if you meet the minimum requirements for that AFQT score, then they're going to look at the line scores, which kind of determines what MOSs you're qualified for based on, how smart you are, if you're good in certain areas or whatever the case is. And that'll open up your window for which MOSs will be available to you. So your AFQT score qualifies you to get into the military. Those line scores qualifies you for a job that you may want in the United States Army. Now, a lot of the requirements are very similar for like officers, but a few differences here and there. So they still have that minimum age of 17, but they have to be under 31 in the year that they commission as officer. There may still be waivers though if you're over 31, but nonetheless, the requirement, without trying to get a waiver, 31 at the time you're going to commission as an officer. Still have the same medical type of, requirements, same physical requirements. You have to go through MEPS and get checked out and make sure that you're physically fit to be able to survive basic training, be able to survive the Army, be able to do the Army combat fitness test and everything. That's still the same, even if you're an officer. Now, it also has citizenship as U.S. resident or U.S. citizen, or you can be a valid resident with a green card. But again, it still goes back to that whole problem where if you're trying to do a job that requires a security clearance, you're not a U.S. citizen, they're not going to be able to get you a secret clearance. So a lot of officer jobs require secret clearances sometimes. There are probably maybe a small amount that don't, but it's probably going to be pretty tough to become an officer in the United States Army if you are not a U.S. citizen. And then, of course, the education on the officer side, you have to have a bachelor's degree, right? High school diploma, not good enough. You're going to have that graduate degree of a bachelor's to be able to be qualified to be able to become an officer, whether you go through an ROTC program or you already have a bachelor's and you just go through the OCS program to be able to try to commission as an officer. They also mentioned security clearance, saying that you just got to complete a background check, fill out a questionnaire, and be interviewed and provide records. But if it's for a secret clearance, you're gonna have to be a U.S. citizen. So keep that in mind if you are someone who is only a legal resident, you have a green card, but you don't have U.S. citizenship. It's gonna be pretty tricky for you to be able to become an officer probably. So those are really just your bare bones, really basic kind of requirements, right? If you have other things like you have an education but you don't want to be an officer, then it may allow you to come in as a higher rank, all sorts of other things. It's always best to talk to a recruiter because these standards change, right? Especially with the recruitment crisis and everything like that. Some of this information could be lowered, could be changed a little bit to try to get more people to be able to join the United States Army or the United States military. So use this as maybe like a good idea as to what you may have to do. But it's always best to go talk to a recruiter for whatever branch of service you're trying to join. I'm talking about the Army's requirements. So in this case, you have to go talk to an Army recruiter to talk about, hey, do I qualify? Be aware there's sometimes waivers for almost everything. So sometimes if you don't meet the requirements for one thing, maybe you have a possibility to be able to get granted a waiver for that. It could allow you to join. So always make sure you're talking to an Army recruiter to tell them your story, kind of make sure, maybe you have certain kind of loopholes or certain other things that may work in your advantage to allow you to join, even though you have something that may disqualify you. Even inside of here, I'm talking about some of the common questions that you can kind of check out, right? Can I join if I have medical disqualifications? Where waivers come in. There's almost a waiver for pretty much anything, but case by case basis as to whether or not you actually qualify for that waiver to be able to join under that waiver. There's a lot of other things you have to meet, like tattoo restrictions, right? If you have a tattoo going all the way up your neck, all the way up the side of your face, or some crazy stuff, probably not going to be eligible to join. Sometimes they may give you the option like, hey, if you can get it removed, then cool, you can join. Depending on where it's at, kind of a location, then maybe have that option. Sometimes they can do waivers for tattoos as well. So always best to kind of check on that. Medical stuff is really tricky, right? Even here it says, can I join with ADHD, right? It says yes, right? It will only prevent you from joining the U.S. Army if you've been treated with ADHD with medication within the last year, or if you display obvious signs of the condition. So that one's pretty common. I know I always hear about with asthma too, people asking, can I join with asthma? A lot of that just depends on how serious it is. Certain other things too, if you were diagnosed with asthma or not diagnosed with asthma. So a lot of other kind of scenarios that kind of fall into that. You just kind of sometimes talk to those recruiters, talk to those MEPS people, see if you're gonna be able to qualify. There are a lot of things that disqualify you from things, right? So like things like felonies, right? If you're convicted with a felony, probably not gonna be able to join. There is still waivers. Even here it's talking about here. Sometimes there are some waivers for certain felonies. Certain ones though are not excusable. So again, just make sure you're talking to an armed recruiter. Now to kind of focus on some of those things that may prevent you from joining the United States Army, I do have a video that I did a while back that talks about things that are going to prevent you from joining the Army. So if you want to learn about those, you can check those out right here. Check out this video right there if you want to learn about what things may disqualify you, but always check with a recruiter. Thanks for watching. Subscribe, like the video. I'm Christopher Chaos, and I'll see you next time. See ya.